This installment of How Not to Build, I'm talking with my good friend Sam Hall. Sam is a client principal at phDATA, a leading data and AI consulting firm. I got him to tell me how to write good requirements for your offshore team, delivering more than just code as an engineering leader, and the value of self-reflection. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Sam, what are you glad about? What's good in life?
What am I glad about? I just finished my basement, which is pretty exciting because I had a fully unfinished basement before. 4 months later, I have a whole second half of my house I've never realized I
Dude,
had to use. Pretty sweet.
nice. Is there anything that you are anxious about?
That's a good question. As far as anxious goes, I am really thankful that I do not have a whole lot that I am super anxious about right now. I think the most anxious I am about things is stuff that I kind of like allow myself to be anxious about because I'm worried about doing things above and beyond at times. So like I'm currently on a bit of a spree trying to build a LinkedIn audience, and I haven't done a very good job of it the last few weeks because I'm trying to build kind of a new strategy around it, and I'm getting a little worried that I'm not going to be able to get that done and do it the right way
Mm,
and do it perfectly the way that all
mm,
perfectionists want to do it. So that's some anxiety, and then also some anxiety. Oh, you always have anxiety around work, especially when you're a consultant. You always have the next thing you need to do, the next deal you're working on, the people that you're trying to convince to do the next thing, and whether your strategy is going to be appropriate or not. So
mm, mm.
those are probably the things I'm most anxious about right now.
Uh, a lot of that's not that we're trying to get rid of the anxiety, I think, but keep the fear at like a healthy level,
Yeah,
if that makes
exactly.
sense.
I call it
What
controlled paranoia.
controlled paranoia?
Yeah,
There's a book, I think, called The Paranoid Survive about
really.
business that I want to read. I heard about it on one of the other podcasts I listened to.
Nice.
Sounds right up my alley because I do you struggle a lot with like imposter syndrome a lot of
Oh, yeah.
times.
Yep.
And for a long time, I was trying to get rid of that. And then I think I heard somewhere along the way, one of the podcasters was like, no, like keep it around. Like it's a healthy thing. Like you don't want to be crippled by it, but if you can leverage it to drive yourself to be better every day, then
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
If you get comfortable, you're not going to keep moving forward. So,
That's right.
you have to stay uncomfortable, but at the same time you have to cultivate some confidence
Agreed.
because you can't just be paranoid and not confident.
Right.
Unfortunately, need to have both. So it's a delicate balance.
How do you have both?
I don't have both, but I think the I think the way that I have started to try to cultivate confidence recently is by really honing in on like what are my strengths and what am I the few things that I'm like really good at like naturally, and then really like aligning my goals and the things that I'm trying to do towards being better at those versus trying to just be good at everything. Um, which is certainly something I've tried to do in the past, but I think the more that I'm able to like see myself have wins in the things that I'm good at, and ultimately like hopefully that leads to wins in, your larger context, your professional life and all, then that leads to some confidence.
I think that's smart, man. I think that's smart. I mean, it's almost feels like it's almost a life hack. Take the things you're already good at, leverage those into that sense of confidence and sort of knowing your place and sort of like where you add the most value in leaning into that. But then at the same time, continuing to be aware of those weak spots to drive you to grow.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard to it's been 18 months for me to really like get to
Mm,
where I understand what I'm good at. And
mm,
I still can't like super succinctly tell you or like give you like here's exactly three things I know that's my strengths, but I'm much, much more confident in what my strengths are today than I was 18 months ago. But it's taken a while. It takes a while to figure that out.
it does. It does. Kind of on that note, what are you working on nowadays? What are your focus areas? What do you do for work? You do consulting. What kind of consulting?
Yeah. So kind of interesting. So I started out probably year or 2 years ago. I started consulting. 2.5 years ago now, I started consulting. I was just doing like kind of solution architects, for data specifically, for data analytics, doing a lot of the data engineering work. So cleaning up the data, structuring it for analysis, for dashboarding, whatever, so that clients can get insights out of it. I have since kind of moved up to where I'm actually more on the sales side now, leading our largest client for my company, phDATA, but being the technical counterpart, so essentially a sales engineer for the account executive that I work with. But along with that comes not only like working with the client, helping guide them through what their needs are and what their problems are, and then how we can help position solutions for them and position a team for them, but also the teams that we already have there, like how do we continue to sustain success for them, build like the size of team that we have at my client is such that my company doesn't know how to deal with that because like we don't have very many clients that are that big. And so like I'm actually kind of doing a lot of experiments around like how do I build a culture on this team, because we have a large enough team to where people are staying around for like 2 years, 2, 3 years at this client. And so
Mm.
it's like a small company at that point. And so how do we build a culture of success? How do we build a culture that provides the most value for the client and helps orient people towards that? You can't just give people a step-by-step manual of how to do that, but
Mm.
you can set up frameworks and maybe some lightweight process to be able to like maybe push them in that direction, and certainly like find champions within your team to like help magnify whatever you're trying to do.
What's been the most so your company phDATA, you guys consult for other companies providing them data solutions around analytics, I'm assuming data warehousing, things of that nature.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you
Everything from like data warehousing all the way up to the ML AI space.
yeah, okay. Hot topic.
Hot topic.
Everybody wants to double click on that one.
That's right.
Um,
That's the cliffhanger.
yeah, yeah. But I'm not going to go there yet. You guys hang in suspense because I think you touched on so your client, the one that you're working with now, pretty large team, larger than some of the other stuff that you guys have done in the past. You're kind of learning on the job, figuring things out. You mentioned you want to build that team culture. It's not necessarily a checklist that you can just be like everybody do XYZ and you're good to go. What's been the most effective thing as you've been experimenting the past how many months you said? 6 months, 12 months?
It's about, yeah, I mean, probably 6 months or so that I've been starting to do some experimenting around
Yeah.
that, try to figure that out. One thing that I have found useful is evaluating our teams. Going back to what I said about like having champions within the account, I'm really big on like I want to find people within the organization. And like when I talk about the account, I have probably 50 or 60 people on the account. And so I want to
On
find
your team,
individuals
50,
on
60
my team,
people on your team.
right, that I'm responsible for. Like consulting companies are weird, it's direct reports is kind of a weird thing. So none of these people actually directly report to me, but I'm obviously responsible for them and the success of their delivery. But one of the things that I have found helpful is first identifying like those people that are very like-minded to me, and then helping like coach and amplify them and put them into a position where they can like kind of amplify those around them, or like continue to share those values that I have to the teams around them,
Mm.
so that hopefully those shared values continue to move down. Value, and when I say values, our our mission for the mission statement for our client organization is to be the best partner that our client ever has. And so there's a lot in that. There's a lot to unpack there, and you kind of unpack it slowly over time. But like having people that kind of share in some of those shared values and continue to trickle that down to the teams beyond just whatever I can do is super helpful. The
Now,
other thing,
is that
yeah,
just one-on-one? I mean, every manager at every company I've ever been at is required to have one-on-one conversations, and those have had largely varying quality to those conversations that I've had over the years. So, does it come down to one-on-ones to you, or is there more on top of that you do to try to, like you said, force multiply those people that you're looking at to carry forward those values?
yeah. So that's where I've been experimenting a little bit. So obviously one-on-ones are very important, and I actually am building out right now some kind of like a conversation framework for one-on-ones because I think one-on-ones are that important that we need to bring up certain topics and we need to ask certain types of questions within one-on-ones to be able to like tease out more than just like how is your project going? Have you done these tasks? Those
What's an
kind of
example
things.
question? What's it?
So
What? Well, go ahead.
yeah, it's more around the um how are you doing type of questions. What is the client experience been like for your teams so far? Are their objectives being hit? And how are you measuring that? That type of thing.
Okay, so kind of driving questions around soliciting from them
Like what
what
value are,
value are you tracking against? And it sounds like even sometimes it's like they need, like you're asking them, how are you going to track value? Maybe they have some work to do to come up with
yeah,
those metrics sometimes. Okay.
100%, 100%.
Okay.
Because like we're all, I think this is very applicable to like a startup company because we're all engineers in this account. Like none of us are like trained managers or leaders or whatever. Like we're all engineers. We like to just go to the next technical thing, do the next task, um, make the next move, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. And getting us to think about like instead of my value is I figured out how to code this loop to do this more efficiently, to do
Yeah.
this thing. The value is the customer got what he needed from whatever I did, even if that's not using the loop and not using the
Right.
efficient loop, like just use an if statement.
Right.
That's probably a bad example, but like focusing on like what are the customer's objectives ultimately? What's the business value that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be created from what we're doing, and how do we measure that so that we can actually verifiably show that we are creating value to the
Yeah.
client so that selfishly we can grow.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Making that shift from I delivered this many story points this sprint to, the client. And even sometimes then it's like, well, the website is 50% faster. Okay, that might be better, but that's still not, I think, the level it should be at. It's, the client added 10% to their overall revenue, or the client broke into the new market, or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So like, understanding like when you're building out a model for personalized recommendations for some product, the metric is not like what's the latency of each API call. Even though that's a good metric to have and understand, like you need to make sure the API
Mm-hmm.
calls back to that model from the mobile app are happening quickly. That's part of value. But the actual value is we got a 10% uplift on all of our transactions since we put out this recommender API, which translates to however many millions of dollars more money we made over the past year.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. Is it difficult when you establish those metrics, because you're establishing that with your team? Is the expectation that they go then communicate that to the client? Is it difficult for them to communicate that to the client, or do you track that separately?
So I actually don't look for my team to communicate back to those things necessarily back to the client. I look for them to collect those things for the client leadership team or me
Mm-hmm.
to be able to then communicate that back to leadership because I have the touch bases with the leadership team more often or I have those meetings set up so that I can go and have like a quarterly business review, for instance, and be able to go and present like here are the five things that my team most impacted over the last quarter for you all. And I can't do that unless I'm able to collect the information about these key things that the team is doing from each project, from each team lead. And so finding ways to obviously make it important for them to find ways that they're creating value, but also be able to feed that back up the chain is super important.
I love that. And I think that's, as I think about the founders who are looking for technical CTOs, I mean, I think that is a skill that is like not just highly desired, but I would say required, is for that person to be able to sit kind of between the development team and the business and be able to translate both ways. I mean, the business has needs to get done, so communicating that to the developers, and then vice versa when the developer says, I can make this 10 times faster, or that's going to take 10 times longer, being able to translate that back into the impact to the business side, like you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, 100%. And I
And
think
it's,
too, like, go ahead, go ahead.
no, no, go for it.
I was going to say too, like realizing that you need both sides of the coin at the same time. Like you have to have your developers that are really interested in being able to create a more efficient loop, but then you also need your developers or your team leads or whatever you want to call them that are focused, that understand that the value for the client is more than just the for loop. It's what actually is the outcome of that loop. But you need both because if honestly, if you had people that were only interested in value, a lot of times those folks are the ones kind of going and having conversations with clients and not doing as much of the programming. And you need people that are really good at programming too.
We call them sales and we don't like them, to be
People called me
clear.
a salesperson for the first time a few weeks ago, and I took it personally, being an engineer.
I mean, they
Like
gave you a
such a
title.
salesperson.
Yeah, they gave you a title of sales engineer. It's like they're asking you to have this duality.
You're
It's like the dark
straddling a
side and the
fence
light
that should
side.
not, yeah,
Yeah,
should not be straddled.
yeah, yeah. So with this team, you mentioned 50, 60 developers. Is that are you, or not developers specifically, but that's the size of the kind of the organization under you. Is some of that offshore, or have you worked with other offshore teams before?
Yeah, so one of the big points of value for our client actually is the fact that we have found a way to be really effective with offshore resources. So phDATA we have offshore resources both in India as well as in South America. We call Latin America, but Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, a few different places. But kind of two variances of the offshore model, essentially one being 12 hours off the US time zone, the other being closer to the US time zone, but still offshore, the offshore model and obviously a little bit cheaper than US resources.
So I'm gonna ask you to spill the secret sauce here. How do you maximize their value? Are there pro tips you have for folks trying to figure out how to do that? I mean, it's hard enough to translate between just a regular engineer, but then once you get into the time zone differences, culture differences,
Yep. I think that's the key and I think you have to lean into that and understand that like that's just a limitation from a culture difference, time zone difference. Because I think the mistake that a lot of people make is like trying to force those people to be the engineers that you have in the US and expecting them to be able to do the same things as the engineers in the US. The ability for a let's talk about India because that's the one that's most kind
yeah,
of common for this.
yeah,
But the ability to collaborate and communicate is so limited for them because of the fact that you have, first of all, 12-hour difference in time. So you really only have like 3 hours that you can really collaborate with your US counterparts. And usually that's in the evenings for them too. So like I don't know about you, but like I'm wrecked in the evenings. So like
yeah,
I don't know how you even think anymore past 5 o'clock. But
yeah,
that's what they
yeah.
have to do every time, and then we expect them to output things just as well as U.S.
Mm,
resources. The reason I think that's really important though is because in order to build good code, in order to be able to build a good product, you have to understand your problem really, really well. Solutions are dime a dozen. Like you can create a billion solutions, but only a subset of those are really going to solve the problem that the client really has or that your company
mm,
is trying to build
mm,
off of.
mm,
And understanding that problem is the hardest thing you're going to do, and it takes a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth, and a lot of connection to whoever is like defining that problem. And the problem with offshore resources is that they have a very limited window, and also like there's like language differences, there's culture like things that you don't even realize where they're not going to be able to understand that problem nearly as well as an engineer in the US because they're going to have 8 hours to be able to collaborate and talk with you for you or your product manager or whatever to be able to help them understand what the actual problem is you're solving. And so I think the key is that you have to be really good at defining the problem that you're solving and having people that really understand that problem, creating work for the offshore so that they can focus on building a solution because they're going to be just as good, if not better, at that than your US engineers. They just need to understand the problem. You need to reduce down the problem a lot better for them than you do for US resources because you know that they're going to be able to like come and have conversations with you constantly.
So I imagine like a 12-page white paper of here's my problem, sending them an email. I mean, is that what we're talking about, or what?
I
How do you,
don't,
how do you communicate that if you can't spend that 6 hours pair programming with them?
yeah, I don't think it's that
That's good.
just throwing a ton of information at them because I think that's the problem is that people throw a ton of information at them and then expect them to just solve, just be able to pull in all that information and immediately be able to get a solution written up that's going to be exactly what you're looking for. I don't think anyone who writes a 12-page white paper, if you are to read that as a developer, you'll always have questions. There's always going to be more questions that need to be asked. And so I think having a either technical or a architectural lead who's able to like ingest your 12-page white paper, whatever the business is handing you, ingest that and be able to kind of break down that problem into bite-sized chunks that can be solved easily and without too much back and forth between your engineers and that person is going to be kind of your core solution. I mean, that's what we try to do. That's what
So
we've done pretty
yeah,
well is find those leads that can do that.
and those leads are U.S. side or offshore side?
Those leads are US side.
U.S. side. And very concretely speaking, when you're talking about breaking down the work, I mean, I made a joke about the 12-page paper, but is it emails? Is it tickets in Jira? Is it system design diagrams? Like, what is it that what's the artifact that you're handing off to the offshore team?
Yeah, the artifact is generally like a Jira ticket, probably a well written out Jira ticket that has good like step by step or details within it that'll make it fairly intuitive for somebody to put it together. And then obviously like you have time with those resources to be able to go back and forth. You just have to make sure that the amount of clarity in those tickets is relational to the amount of time that they have to ask questions about it so that you can kind of maximize the time that they have to interact with you.
Okay, a few more hyper specific questions. What is your expected turnaround time for a Jira ticket?
Depends on the points. When you say turnaround time, what do you mean by that?
Daily, weekly, monthly?
We expect we expect daily updates of like
Daily
where the ticket
updates?
is. We don't want the thing I hate the most is when somebody goes dark on you and is just working on
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
and then they come back up and it never is what you wanted it to be. So like we expect, I mean that's where
I've
you're
never done that in my career.
I'm sure you haven't because I haven't either for sure. I've never written stupid things. But it's key for us to have like those daily stand-ups. I think for like if you're an all US team, I've seen a lot of all US teams like they'll either write their updates in Slack or they'll maybe have like two a week stand-ups or something just because it's easier for them to communicate outside of the window of a stand-up from an agile perspective. But we really emphasize like you need the everyday agile stand up for the offshore team because we've got to have people that are kind of keeping up with what challenges they having because sometimes they'll bring it. We've seen a lot of times the offshore team will bring up challenges. Sometimes they don't ask for like a
Yeah,
resolution to them. They're just like, oh yes, I'm having a challenge around this, and then they just leave it there. And if you're not listening, you're going to miss that, and then they're going to come back to you tomorrow and be like, yeah, I had a challenge around that, and I didn't really get anything done. And at that point, it's your fault. Like
right.
you didn't listen to what they said because they'll tell you what you need to know. It's just a matter of like again the lead, I feel like the US lead that is leading that team has to be more than just like a technical expert. They got to be kind of a people expert
Yeah,
as well. A little bit more people expert than you normally would have.
yeah, that's really good insight. So it sounds like daily communication tasks are expected to get done maybe over the course of a couple days. probably several tasks per week or something. Okay. And then for those tasks, because I've seen a lot of non-technical people manage their project in Excel or Google Sheets. If you can do it, great. But like you're saying, you want to make sure that communication is clear. So, do you guys have a framework that you follow in your task descriptions to make sure the right level of information is in each of those tasks when you're sending them to the offshore team?
We actually don't. So the one thing we do have is that every Jira task has to have a definition of done so that we know when it's done. Because there's way too many times when tickets will just it's like build this feature and you can keep building a feature forever. You can keep testing it and modifying it and like
Yes,
you got to
sir.
have some definition of like when am I done with this? And especially for offshore teams, I think because again, like they can just spin off in a direction very easily and just keep going. And so you have to be very clear on when it's done and be able to keep them like kind of oriented and like keep asking that
Yeah.
question like have you hit that mark yet?
Yeah. What's an example of a definition of done for you guys?
Man, it's been a while since I saw a Jira ticket. So let's say we're building a new view on top of a table, database table, building a new view for the business. A definition of done would be the view is created the view is created in this environment. The code is checked in here, and then this person has reviewed and signed off on it. Something like that. To where you kind of get whatever that end state is after the definition of done should be where you, as a lead or a product owner or whatever, um, are comfortable with the progress of the work. Essentially, you have to define the end state for the developer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you say environment, I mean that's you typically have that dev, you know, I mean people have different, I guess, dev
Yeah,
environment, test environment, staging environment, production environment. So in the ticket, and most places have three, but four is good too for the brain to think about, I think. So in the ticket, you're kind of saying, hey, I expect to see this specific result, kind of written from a business perspective, not necessarily an engineering perspective. And I expect to see it in this particular environment so that when they say it's done, you know that you as a lead or even as a business person with access to the test environment, let's say, could go in and physically check it on your web browser, whatever, and verify
right,
that it's been done the way that you expect.
right. And I think that's why, like, a lot of our definitions of done that I've seen in the past, like, we include kind of what I said before, like a person, like an actual name of a person that has to go in and check the thing and verify it
Mm,
so that they have to go in and like, in the production environment, query the view, make sure it returns the data they expect or the object is there as they expect and actually verify that it happened because it's very easy to, I'm sure like it's very easy to masquerade that you've done something and not actually done
yep. Yep. Oh, I do it all the time.
it. Yeah,
Every day.
we all
Every
do it.
day, every day I come home from work like, so productive, babe. I just talked with people on my podcast all day,
Yep, just did the things.
pretending to work. She loves it.
I
She loves
bet.
it.
I bet. Your definition of done is check in the bank account. That's her definition of done.
That's right. Yeah. So as long as the money's showing up, she's fine.
That's right.
Uh,
Whatever you want to do, Dan.
yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe not anything. We won't go there.
Just be home for dinner.
That's right.
Uh, all right. And so you kind of mentioned, I think, also going back to learning how to work with these teams, doing experiments, iterating on, trying new things, what works, what doesn't. And you also kind of just mentioned that as part of that growing in your own leadership role, how do you evaluate your effectiveness as a leader?
Yeah. And something I've kind of noticed for myself is, at least for me, growth as a leader comes as a result of like personal growth just as much as it does trying to like grow professionally, so to speak. So like focusing personally on becoming better with my time, becoming more focused on like what my strengths are, and being able to take better advantage of those, setting goals for myself and being more strict about like, documenting those or tracking them or whatever. That I think has like an effect on then how you are professionally, because ultimately you're the same person on both sides. And then ultimately from there, I think your team is ultimately going to be a reflection of who you are ultimately. And so if you're able to build good disciplines in your personal life, it's almost kind of like a hack for like you're going to have those disciplines within your professional life. And if you're in a leadership position, that's something you want to do, that's going to be a way for you to kind of begin the cycle of impacting your team to be like that. As far as like evaluating whether you're doing the right thing or not, I think that's where imposter syndrome kind of comes in.
Mm,
You're just trying things all the time and seeing what happens. You're just experimenting a lot. But I think as long as you have the way that I've framed it recently for somebody, instead of calling it imposter syndrome, is like thinking about the fact that like always being aware that you just haven't hit your peak yet. Like you think about like
mm,
in sports, teams hit their peak too early and then they fall off and they lose in the tournament and they don't win the championship or whatever.
mm.
But if you can like get into that mindset of the fact that like, sure, I'm doing really well right now, but like I haven't hit my peak yet. Like this isn't where I can actually get to. Like I can actually get to this next level and kind of pushing yourself that way. I think that's where that paranoia comes in a little bit, and that imposter syndrome comes in because you haven't hit it. But thinking about it in those terms has been helpful for me recently. But I think that's what you have to do to that mindset. I think as long as you have that, I think you can have some confidence in that you're going to continue to be effective because you care and you're trying and you're continuing to better yourself.
And I actually think that's a really big shift just to have that first shift of awareness to say, I'm going to do an experiment and treat a lot of your activities as experiments and to be start to be reflective about what am I doing? Is that working? What's it working toward, right? Kind of getting back to the why do we do things in the beginning? What do you really want out of life? Why are you doing it? And making sure you're connecting those activities, thinking about them as experiments, are they helping me get closer to those goals that I'm setting?
Right.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I want to go back real quick because a few years ago, I heard, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was a popular thought, and maybe it still is, to say that who you are at home basically doesn't matter with who you are at work. And having a really strong separation between personal lives and public lives. Sounds like you kind of disagree with that.
Yes, I think that there probably is a way to frame it either way. Um, there's pros and cons, but like I ultimately see it as you should look to be the person that you want to be at work is the person that or the person you want to be at home is also the person that goes to work. And if you can optimize the person you are at home, you're going to be the person that you want to be at work. You're going to have the values that you want to have at work if you're working on those at home. And so that translation, I don't believe that you can be, at least long term, just two completely different people between home and work. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't like separate out thinking about work constantly at home. I think that that's probably where that mindset or that concept is really going towards. And I think obviously like you should to the areas that you're in to the space that you're at right now instead of constantly being distracted by thoughts about whatever else is going on in your life. But I do believe that from a core value standpoint, like who you are and how effective you're going to be, you work on being effective at home, you're going to be the same type of effective at work ultimately, and that's going to be a more sustained way to drive that.
I very much agree.
I tell my wife a lot like there's no such thing as work-life balance. That's not a real thing. She always disagrees with me.
I heard a mother say that motherhood was all about rotating spheres of neglect. And I thought that was such a perfect analogy for what I'm trying to do every day. Like there's always a bunch of choices I'm making to neglect a bunch of things so I can have hyper focus on this one thing, push that as far as I can, and then move to the next thing and hyper focus on that. And I think that's
Yeah,
kind of what I hear you saying. And I don't, it resonated with me.
that's good. I mean, that's like that's just prioritization, right? Like the
Yeah.
I recently read something about like difference between like strategy versus a plan and like the difference between those two. like strategy is where you pick what you're not going to focus on.
Mm,
If strategy is not something that should be pleasant necessarily for you, like
mm,
completely pleasant for you. Like it should be like, I have these five things I could do, but what are the two that I'm going to focus on? And
I
then
like
then you
that.
can build your plan from that. But yeah, that was kind of cool.
I really like that framing. Dude, thank you so much for taking time
Dude,
to
yeah,
come
this was
on
fun.
and chat. Yeah, it was really good. I learned so much every time I have one of these conversations. Yeah, it's great to have you.
Dude, let's do it again.
Agreed.